Hey, David Bristow here with an episode of Chordplay, and this is I Love 90s Chords. And I recently did, a couple months ago, I Love 80s Chords, and that actually had a good response. I think it had like 15,000 views so far, and I thought what better way to, ring in the new year with some 20 to 30-year-old guitar chords. But seriously, the 1990s is kind of an interesting era of music because there was an obvious shift from a lot of the guitar rock and hair metal from the 80s into the alternative kind of revolution in the 90s. And it was a hard transition for me because I was still listening to, groups like White Lion and Whitesnake and Van Halen. And then suddenly there was Alice in Chains and Weezer and, Radiohead and all these groups that appeared. And I thought, what is going on? Everything changed. Nobody's playing, these crazy solos. But one thing that my ear definitely caught throughout that whole decade were all these really interesting and expressive and unusual and just kind of out there chords. And that's what this whole series is about, is finding chords and kind of being creative and playful and, tapping into some of these ideas. And there's a ton of great ideas hiding in the 1990s. There was a lot of experimentation in this really kind of out there approach for a lot of these musicians. Listen to groups like Soundgarden or really any of the great bands, even groups, that were really, really popular, like Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains. The chords and the ideas and the way they put their songs together was really interesting, and different. It wasn't just a bunch of power chords. There were, jazz influences and ninths and 11ths and 13ths and all this stuff, and flat nines and flat fives and really like a smorgasbord of all these cool chords everywhere. But the opening, that was Let Me Go by Cake, and I'm a huge Cake fan. That was from Prolonging the Magic, was 1998, I think. And Prolonging the Magic, I think, is one of the best albums of the 90s. It's just loaded with all these great songs. And I've always liked, that tune. Sheep Go to Heaven, there's a bunch of great songs on there. But the interesting thing about the guitar part in that song, though, is it's really just a dressed up 1-4-5 in A. A major to D to E. But the way they've arranged the chords, it's got this crazy kind of almost rockabilly, sounding lick. And then the chords are kind of disguised, where it's not just a straight A to a straight D to a straight E, which there's a million songs, that have those three chords. But they went the extra mile and they kind of dressed it up and disguised it like this. So the opening, those are just partial chords, A to D and then A to E. And then right there, it basically goes through this crazy kind of open string, like a twangy rockabilly lick. So really slow, that's basically implying A major 7. Kind of. And there's your major 7th right there, that G sharp. And it's also hiding right there on the first fret on the G. And then he spells out a D over F sharp. Really clever. And then go back to that A thing again. And then you're going to basically play an E over G sharp, which is kind of fretted like that. It's spaced out across the strings. Really cool lick and riff, though. Right there. But Cake's awesome. That's one of the few bands I can think of in rock that have a prominent trumpet in the group, which is amazing. And it's simple and it's kind of funky and different, but I like it. It speaks to me. And it's like, yeah, I love Cake. All right, up next we have the song Burden in My Hand by Soundgarden. And you can see I've switched to an acoustic guitar and we're in open C tuning, which is a little unusual. And there's several examples in this lesson that are going to be on acoustic guitar or altered tunings, and we'll move, from electric to acoustic as we go along. But this is really, different. And so open C, we're going to have C, G, C, G, G, E. Think of Led Zeppelin and Jimmy Page, and that'll kind of put you in the right, the right ballpark, I guess. But it looks and sounds like this. And definitely make sure you give your guitar a chance to acclimate to the new tuning too, because it's going to freak out, it's going to go out of tune, and you want to make sure that your guitar is perfectly in tune for something like that, because even just a slight variance in the strings, it's going to sound horrible if it's not in tune. But the interesting thing with altered tunings is identifying chords, because right there, 2 of the strings on the guitar are in, the same tuning that they're in standard tuning. And then 4 of the strings on the guitar have been changed or altered. So that really makes it hard to identify chords, but I'm going to step through this and kind of help you see, chord-wise what's going on there. So it really just starts with a C, but it's played like this. And this is kind of flirting with like a C7. And then this would basically be, a B-flat major, sus2, sus4. And then it's definitely, a E-flat major. And then it's just going back to C with the open strings. And they kind of add that little, extension on there, which those are really just, really just, I guess, like a chord passing tone in a way or whatever, where, it's kind of out of key, but it does give it that Zeppelin sound. It reminds me of Jimmy Page, big time. Next we have the song Dry from Incubus, and this is from their 1999 album Make Yourself, and I'm definitely an Incubus fan. And I know when I first heard, Pardon Me and some of their hits on the radio, and by the time I heard Drive, it was just really refreshing for my ear to hear chord changes, and not just basic major or minor chords or power chords or drop D power chords, like the actual chord progression, chord changes, beyond just simple stuff. And Drive looks like this. Heard that song, it was like refreshing. Like I said, it was like, oh my gosh, real chords, and they're not just simple, triads or whatever. So there's an E minor 7 and then an E minor 9 right there, and then C major 7, and then an A7 sus2. And in my in my head or my ear, I hear him, he's kind of bending at least like the D and the G string just slightly on that A. Gives it like a bouncy, flavor or sound. And then for the change, it's just that C major 7, and then he's going to an A7 and kind of adding like that sus4 right there. It's also grabbing the 6th over there, that F sharp. And the really interesting guitar part, and it has like a jazzy, sequence of chords. but it's definitely you know, a rock hit and a radio hit, you know, a huge hit for Incubus. Next is the song Take a Picture from the band Filter, and this is from the 1999 album Title of Record. And this was a huge, you know, radio hit. And this is in drop D, but there's some really interesting things happening with the chords once again. And, you know, it's not a traditional, you know, drop D, like one finger power chord kind of song. There's something a little bit more, you know, interesting happening. But the intro, you've got this kind of quiet electric part. And then you'll hear an acoustic guitar kind of playing with this A sus2, A major, A sus4. And then a D sus4 to D major. But then the electric guitar is kind of playing off of that, and it's doing... It's really cool. You kind of find the same part, but played in an entirely different way. And those two, you know, guitar parts complement each other. The acoustic and the electric kind of, you know, develop, or they fill out the sound. That's really interesting. But the chorus is where things really become cool. And, you know, we're in drop D, and you'll see we're kind of doing these stacked, you know, power chord shapes. But we're, you know, in drop D, so we're technically kind of playing with this shape if you were in standard. But in drop D, you're doing this. And then also the B and the high E string are open up there. Chord nut, so I know that's you know, that's making me kind of freak out or whatever to hear those chords. I love, you know, textures and these unusual sounds. You know, really cool chords. So that first shape, that's basically an A sus2. And then we're going to move all the way up here, and that's going to be, what, a D6 sus2? And then a B sus2 sus4? And then a G 6/9. So there's some unusual, you know, chords popping out there. It's mainly with the open strings on the top, too, that are kind of influencing, you know, those strange tonalities. But it's really interesting. Up next is the song Paranoid Android from Radiohead, and this is from their 1997 album OK Computer. And I've had a lot of students over the years ask me about this song. You know, can I learn Paranoid Android? And it's a weird tune. I love, you know, weird songs and weird musical ideas. But the guitar part, it's a challenge, and there's some really, you know, unusual, you know, chords and tonalities that they're kind of flirting with. And we're just going to look at the acoustic part and kind of the intro and verse, you know, but the song just kind of opens up like a flower, and it ends, you know, completely different than how it started. So it looks and sounds like this. Very challenging. You know, that's not just a, you know, G, C, and D kind of chord progression. There's a bunch of stuff going on there. And of course, Tom is singing and playing the acoustic part at the same time, which is totally not fair. I can barely play the acoustic part. And then to think about singing on top of that, it's like, no, I think I would just screw that up royally. But it starts off, and we're basically playing a C minor chord. And I'm just going to walk through the chords first, and then we can kind of talk about the picking a little bit. C minor, and then it's like an E flat over B flat. And what, an F sus2. And then he does this kind of quick, which is really unusual. Basically flirting with what, like A7 sus4 and then a B flat 6 add 11, which is odd. Very unusual. And then we're going to move all the way down after we've done this. Then it moves all the way down to a G minor down here. So we're going to mimic that C minor. So now we're down to G. And then it's going to rise up on an A7 sus4 flat 9, and then a B6, and then right here it's an E7 flat 5, and then an E7 sus4, and then E minor 7, and you can kind of hear that little melody. They're kind of strumming through it. Out that little melody hiding there. And then go back to that first part again. And I love this part. That's a G minor 6. F major 13, and then just E7. Really cool. And the way he's picking through it is very awkward. It's not a normal picking pattern like like you'd hear from other songs like December by Collective Soul or, something like that where you're picking through chords. It's erratic and kind of spastic and random, and but it's beautiful at the same time. It's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with I Love 90s Chords, and obviously, I'm looking at an entire decade of music, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of songs I could have chose and included. So in a 15-20 minute, video like this, it's kind of hard to pack everything I wanted to talk about. And I had some other, songs kind of picked out, but, I felt like, I kind of talked and demonstrated, some of these parts, and there were some weird chords and tunings happening. So I didn't actually get to talk about everything I wanted to talk about. So depending on, the reaction and the comments and things like this, I can totally make a part 2 or a part 3 or a part 30 or whatever. Because there's a bunch of, interesting things happening in music in the 90s, just like there was in the 80s or the 70s or even the 50s. And of course there's interesting things happening today. But I kind of like looking back and then, borrowing ideas from the past and then trying to bring it to the present. And, I don't know, there's just something about these classic artists, and some of them are still active today, some of them have disappeared. But I'm definitely a fan of just music, whether it's from the 1890s or the 1990s or whatever. I like it all. So leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more material. And Happy New Year, too. Thank you.